going into Redwood.
Okay, so my father-in-law's mom and dad and great. At least that's how the story goes. Yeah, so I don't guess the 2 days. Just like it's
welcome everyone. I'm Mark Neikerk and I'm Red Chris Howard Center for Civic Engagement at NCU. Our job, I kind of be sort of fond of describing it as we're the match.com of classroom opportunities and community opportunities. So we're looking always for nonprofits that we can connect classrooms to for service line and other project-based learning opportunities. We've done a lot of work over the past few years in Newport on the west side, which by demographics is the poorest and neediest neighborhood in Northern Kentucky. It also, interestingly, happens to be the original neighborhood, so historically it's significant as well. So we've had a lot of classes that are engaged in Newport. If you'd like to see what some of that looks like, I'd urge you, if you think of where the Hofbrau House is, just in the back of that is an old cobblestone street, and sitting there is the Southgate Street School, which was for just a little over 80 years the African-American only school in Kenton County, and a pretty cool story really, because think about that, you're 2 blocks away from the very division line between freedom and slavery, and immediately after the Civil War, at a time when Kentucky as a state resisted the freedom of slaves, Newport built a school to educate the sons and daughters of slaves. We're in a place this evening where the community also said, let's build a school. So Redwood family saw a need and responded to it. And I'd like to introduce John Francis, who directs the school here, and tell you a little bit more about that history and what you want to know about this place. John, we're kind of fortunate to be here.
So can everybody hear? Can anybody not hear me? You're good? You're good? Gina, you good? Okay. I'll try to speak without the mic. So I thought I'd cover just a little bit about history and then maybe what's happening now. Some of you I have seen before, and many of you I have not. So I'm John Francis, Executive Director and CEO of Redwood. I'm approaching my 5th year, the most special place I've ever worked. So imagine at least 67 years ago, this May 13th, right? You know this history. That 2 families, the Reeders and the Woods, those of you who think quickly, Reeders, Wood, Redwood, right? Had some kids with disabilities and they couldn't find services or equipment for those kids. So they cobbled some things together, and a few other families in a similar situation kind of came together with them. First became known as the United Cerebral Palsy Association of Northern Kentucky, with a whopping budget of how much money would you guess? How many thousands of dollars? 4,000. So Al and somebody got an old slide projector. Some of you remember slide projectors. They would go out and do these dog and pony shows to raise that $4,000 to meet their budget. So classes were taught in year one in the basement of a church in Covington by some nuns who walked a couple doors down in their habits, I presume. And I got to go into that church a number of months ago and just stand in those 2 classrooms down in the basement and just imagine the sounds, the giggles, the cries, the poking at each other, and some of that. The need for space outgrew or was outgrown by the needs. So more kids needed more services. They grew, they went to another church, continued to grow, and then late 60s, this building was built. So we owned this building. We leased the property from the diocese for, if you can help us out with this, it's a whopping $1 a year. So we could use your help with that. So we have a great relationship with the diocese and the children's home down the street. So since being here in late 60s, children's services continued to grow, and then since moving here, we've added adult services. So we've gone from year one, a $4,000 budget, to today, 67 years later, about a $7.5 million budget. We went from year one, 7 kids, including Cheryl Wood, whose picture still adorns our hallways and still comes to events like the Express. Cheryl was one of the original 7, so we've gone from 7 children to about 800 total children and adults that are served here Monday through Friday, morning through the evening. So we're not residential or after hours. We've gone from a handful of volunteer nuns teaching classes to about 160 employees. We've gone from teaching some classes to now providing about 18 different types of services. We're a healthcare provider. We have 12 nurses in the building, RNs and LPNs, to respond to a whole host of medical issues, handing out prescribed medications. We're an employment facility in that we help high school and adult age people do job search, do resumes, job acquisition on-site, job acquisition off-site. We're an educational provider. We provide traditional nursery to little bitty kids in the weeks and months old who eat, sleep, pee, poop, and repeat a lot, to some preschool education that's formal to help them for kindergarten readiness. We have 3 therapies here: speech, physical, and occupational therapy. So we do a whole host of things. What's different about us, I think, is size of operation, the number of services that we provide, and the age range that we provide services to. An interesting story: we have 3 different nursing schools that come in for clinic rounds, and oftentimes you hear from them, we love Redwood because we have so much under one roof. You have so many clients under one roof. You have such an age span from pediatrics all the way through geriatric under one roof. So it's a special place. That's probably enough on that. Is that
Perfect.
Good enough? And then I would like to read some comments and hope I make our speaker's mother proud if she were here. Is your mother here?
She's in Portland, Oregon. So no.
What's her number? Let's get her on the phone so you can listen in. So anyway, welcome to 6 at 6 Community Lecture hosted by Redwood tonight. Thanks whoever chose us. Thanks for choosing us, where nearly 800 children and adults are guided through to their highest level of independence through a variety of services. So this lecture series features NKU faculty talking about their research for a community audience provided in a community setting. That's why you are here tonight. This evening we're privileged to hear Dr. Zackary Hart, a professor of public relations who teaches a whole bunch of things, including communication studies, health communication, and public relations courses, all at NKU. His research focuses on information-seeking strategies and sense-making process for parents of children with disabilities and the socialization of new employees. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Hart.
Thank you, everybody. So I'm not big on the microphone either, so can you all hear me? That's fine, because I teach and stuff like that. I'm a communication person, I guess. So I just want to come out and be close to the audience, and part of it too is that I'm going to speak for a while tonight, but I'd also like there to be some conversation, because a lot of this whole process of information seeking and sense making is sharing stories of experiences that we have had. So I'm not going to necessarily have like these magic answers about, well, here's the way to do it, because there is no one way to do it. But what I can tell you from the research that I've done, probably the most effective method is really talking to people that have gone through similar or very almost exact same situations, and that is where we're really going to learn not only information that we need to be successful in raising our children, but also it's real important in terms of support and coping, because a lot of these things can be very difficult and overwhelming at times. So I'm going to start a little bit here. I have a little bit of an overview before I'll get into the study itself, but I'll talk a little bit about today, because today was a very stressful day, actually. So I am the father of Isaac, who is 14 years old, and I'm going to tell you a lot more about him in just a few minutes. Isaac has Down syndrome. He also has ADHD. He has a congenital heart defect that he's had 3 open heart surgeries. We'll most likely have one this next summer. It's been delayed a little bit. So today, he's been sick for the past 4 or 5 days, which, of course, everyone's been sick, it seems like. And so he missed school on Thursday. Well, we got called on Thursday because he got sick at school. I'm like, oh, God, go get him. Of course, that happens all the time. And then he missed Friday, but that was a snow day, so that was okay. And then he was home again today, and we were supposed to have a sitter tonight, watch him, and she canceled at like 5:15, and so we're like, okay, and his mom was supposed to come tonight, and so of course, when you're at that point, but his brother's here, Christopher, right over there, so, but that's normal, okay, stuff like, kind of that reacting, chaotic sort of thing, last minute, becoming adaptable. It's like, okay, yeah, I'm kind of stressed because I do have to be there and do this presentation. It's like, now it's 5:15 and haven't heard, and it worked out and everything. And of course, Isaac, the sitter's name is Sherry, so for probably about 2 hours before, he was saying, Sherry coming, Sherry coming, Sherry coming, and lots of repetition, and then of course now we have a change. So there's a transition here that's got to happen real quickly and everything. So I'm sure I'll hear about it when I get home. So anyway, that's just a typical day, in the life of a parent with special needs, a child with special needs. What I'm going to do tonight then is I'm going to present some findings from a research study that I did last year. I'll talk for a while, answer questions certainly, and if you have questions along the way, feel free to raise your hand and ask at the time, but we also can do it at the end. But I'm also hoping after this is done, because I'm not talking 90 minutes, I know we have till like 7:30, maybe 40-ish or something like that, and then just share some stories and experiences and learn a little bit from each other. There's one study that I do want to mention, or an article that I was looking at in the Wall Street Journal that was from last year that talked about some recent research that was done of parents of kids with life-threatening conditions, which a lot of times kids with disabilities have something like that, like a heart condition or something else like that. And what was interesting, and you may have heard some of this, is about 30% of the parents ultimately received a PTSD diagnosis. And that's real common in this community. And another 30 to 40% had symptoms that impaired their kind of day-to-day functioning. And obviously, and some parents, and I found another article where parents say it's really not PTSD, it's CTSD, so it's chronic trauma syndrome. It's not like it's all over, and you don't want it to be, because, the kid's not here anymore. So, but it's more a chronic at all times sort of thing. And certainly there's support that's needed for that. But part of why I point that particular statistic out is that one of the symptoms of PTSD is avoidance of information and also not being able to process information. And that has a really important impact because as parents, we have a critical role in caring for our children. There's a lot that's put on us in terms of, doing therapies, understanding medical treatments, giving medication perhaps. We're always, looking for other things that we can do to help our child to be successful, and that's a lot of stuff to remember and to keep track of. And so when you're experiencing something like PTSD, that impacts your ability to even understand that information. And sometimes, and what I found in my own experience as well as just talking with other parents is we don't often see that on the part of practitioners necessarily understanding that that's part of the process, that we got to give people time to have that emotional reaction to information, and that was something that definitely came across in the studies, the emotional piece of it, and being able to understand that is a whole, that's normal to have that, and we have to provide support to make that, to work with that better, so that ultimately we understand the information, we give meaning to it, and we can make decisions, and we can do a better job taking care of our kids. So I just wanted to kind of point that out. All right. So let me tell you a little bit about Isaac. He's on NKU's campus last fall, and he's gone there a lot ever since he was a baby. And not as much as he's gotten older now. It's kind of he's doing a lot of kind of teenage things. It's not as exciting to him as before, but he would walk all over campus. I mean, I work in Griffin Hall, which is not the newest building anymore. The Health Innovation Center is, but he actually likes that building better now than Griffin Hall. But he liked to ride the elevators. He would take us. We would start in Griffin and walk all the way over to where the soccer field is, which is a pretty long walk. And I'd end up seeing all parts of campus because most faculty, we kind of stay wherever our offices are and where our classes are, and you don't actually get out, maybe go to the Union or something like this. Well, I'd see everything because of Isaac. And sometimes I'd run into Mark on the stairwell a few times with Isaac going up and down. So he's very, very much a part of the NKU community. Isaac is 14 years old. He's in 7th grade at Woodland Middle School, and one of his classmates' mother is here, Donovan, and his mom, Nancy, and they're the same age. And in fact, Nancy met Isaac when he was probably 3 weeks old, I think it was. So he was brand new at that time. And Sarah was one of his first special education teachers back in, I think, kindergarten, 1st grade, at River Ridge, yep. Isaac loves Christmas. It is Christmas year-round at my house, whether I want it to be or not. He's kind of ruined Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer for me because I've had to watch it so many times. But it is something that gives him intense joy. He has probably 40 to 50 animatronic Santas. We are always looking for more on eBay, and they have to sing Jingle Bells. And so that is, and they're all, they're still all out in our living room and just kind of, sitting there, and so that's one of his favorite things. He's very fascinated with the weather. He pays attention to if it's going to storm. He's always hoping for a tornado. I don't think that's a good thing, but and we go to the National Weather Service site every day and look up the forecast in about 15 different cities. And there's a particular graphic for when there's going to be a thunderstorm with lightning that he gets upset if I can't find it. And it's like, well, I got to look at the national map and see where are there thunderstorms happening. Hopefully they show in the forecast that particular graphic, but that's something that he's completely fascinated with. He also loves Toy Story. He probably has 7 or 8 Woody dolls, some that talk, some that don't, some duplicates, the same thing. And he carries he brings one of those to school quite frequently. As I mentioned, he loves taking walks. He plays ball. His brother can attest that he has very good aim, and he's very, very strong. He enjoys chocolate shakes at Grader's every Friday after school, and he's a regular chocolate milk drinker at Bigby's in Taylor Mill. So if you've ever seen him there, usually with his mom, he hangs out there, and sometimes Starbucks, but he likes Bigby's a little bit better. So this is Isaac's family, and so as I mentioned, his brother Christopher is right over here, and he is a junior high science teacher at St. Mary's in Alexandria. And his mom, Tracy, who's over on your right there, she is the interim director of first-year programs at NKU and also a lecturer. And then his sister-in-law, Alex, who Christopher and Alex got married last May, she's a manager at Dewey's Pizza. She's in class tonight, though, because she's in the graduate program in the Department of Communication at NKU. So Isaac was the best man in Christopher and Alex's wedding last spring, and he was amazing at the wedding. He walked his brother down the aisle, which of course I weren't sure, was he going to make it all the way down? But luckily it wasn't a real long aisle, but he did great. And then he stood up in the best man spot for a little while, and then he came and sat with his mom and me and his grandma, and then he went over to Alex's parents for a little bit, and then he went out with the maid of honor at the end and did great at the wedding. But that was a very exciting and memorable event last year. And Alex and Christopher really hold a special place in Isaac's heart. And we knew when Alex was, kind of connected with Isaac, that when Christopher was going to get married, that we had to have somebody like that, obviously in our family, that cared about Isaac in that way. Isaac's compassionate. He is always sensitive to whenever something's going on with you. I swear he has ESP, because I can not say anything and he knows he'll say words that are related to whatever I'm thinking. So I don't know if other people's kids are like that, but there's like this ESP thing, like, stop it. How do you know that? He's enthusiastic and determined, but he is bossy and he is stubborn. And that, and he's a teenager now too, so he gets really moody, and there's all that kind of stuff. Christopher was a lot quieter about things. Isaac, no, not so much. So I know everything that's going on with him. Plus, I'm older too, so that probably makes a little bit of a difference. As I mentioned, Isaac's has Down syndrome, ADHD, and a congenital heart defect that, as I said, has required 3 open heart surgeries, and probably a 4th in the next year. His mom and I did not know he had Down syndrome until he was born. We were a little older when he was born, so we chose not to do testing, because everyone makes different choices about that, but we knew it wouldn't impact, what our decision was about having a baby. And it had been 13 years. My PhD was in the middle of all of that. And his birth was very, very traumatic, like so many other parents of kids with special needs. He was born about 12:30 in the morning, very fast labor, maybe an hour and a half. He was 4 weeks early, feet first. So the first thing I saw was his right foot. We had an audience, because they don't have breech births very much, and it was too late, because they were going to try to do cesarean. It was like, nope, he's coming out and everything. Luckily, he was a little bit smaller. Seemed okay at first when he was born. I do remember when I was looking at him, like, oh man, his ears are kind of small. I do remember distinctly noticing that. But he's still kind of puffy and everything, because he was a brand new baby. Then about 2:30 in the morning, the nurse came to give him a bath, and I could tell she was in a room kind of, I could see through the glass and her giving him a bath, and then she was kind of looking at him, and he was kind of floppy, which is real typical of kids with Down syndrome. So she called a pediatrician in to take a look at him. And again, it's about 3 o'clock, 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. The doctor comes out and says, oh, he's fine. And of course, I didn't know that much about Down syndrome at that time, just a little bit, from kind of things like growing up and stuff. But Isaac did have, visible characteristics of Down syndrome. So knowing that, I don't know how the doctor could say, that, oh, he's fine. I think, part of me thinks because it was the middle of the night and they didn't want to deal with it. I really do think that probably was it. So Christopher was there too, and he was only 13 at that time. So we were there till maybe 4 or 5 in the morning. Then we went home and slept briefly, then got up and I started making phone calls. And then about 8 in the morning, and then this is on a landline. I was calling on a landline, so you're able to call the operator and have them interrupt. This is back in 2005, and so Tracy had them interrupt my call. And basically, I remember just saying, they just told me Isaac has Down syndrome and a heart condition, and didn't know what that meant, and so that's the way that I found out he had Down syndrome, which is totally not a good way to find it out. First of all, I wasn't there. You don't tell parents something like that without both of them there. When Christopher and I got to the hospital, Tracy was still in her room. She had a roommate too, so there was somebody else in the room that wasn't even her family. Okay, so another not a good way to tell that information. And the doctor actually asked her a question. He said, didn't you know? So it felt somewhat accusatory, like, we didn't do testing or something. Okay, so that was kind of our introduction that very first day. And then, of course, worrying about what's the heart thing mean, because we really didn't know, what that was going to be. And then it was like an entire day of just people coming into the room and telling you all kinds of things. Most of it you're not really absorbing. And I remember the second day they did finally get us connected with the Down Syndrome Association of Greater Cincinnati, and it took a little while to actually contact them because you're not quite ready for that at that point. But I do remember that being in the early days. And then he was in NICU for 10 days, not because of his heart, it was because he had jaundice. And it took him that many days to get kind of to a normal level there. And that was the start of kind of where we were. And So our journey of emotional information overload, complex decision-making, and sense-making then began. We learned about all kinds of things related to the heart, therapies of all kinds for speech, gross and fine motor development, IEPs, Medicaid waiver programs, and adult vision statements, just to name a few. And none of these things did I really know anything about before we had Isaac, and now I know lots of stuff about all of these different topics. Prior to Isaac's birth, my research as a professor, and I've been at NKU since 2003, so I've been there, a pretty long time now. I'm one of the old faculty now and everything. And I actually been another institution prior to that. So for about 20 years, I studied new employee socialization, and I really looked at, what do people, what kind of messages do newcomers receive when they're coming into the workplace? How does that help them adjust to the workplace? And looking at that and what are the information-seeking strategies, and studied that topic for about 20 years. But in many ways, what I learned in my study of new employee socialization applied a lot to this role as a parent of a child with special needs. It's, for most people, a completely new role that you're not familiar with at all. Most of us have some idea what it is to be a parent, because you probably had parents, you have siblings who are parents, you might have been a parent before. So you have, it's new for every parent, but when your child has a disability or special needs, it's a whole different world with that. And so that was something that I realized, what I had been doing previously, I didn't realize it, but it really connected to what I wanted to study and really the way I wanted to look at what it was to be a parent of a child with special needs. I knew I wanted to learn more. I wanted to make a real positive difference. And so after serving as the Department of Communication Department Chair for 8 years, from 2010 to 2018, I was fortunate enough to receive a research sabbatical from NKU for a year, which was, I'd never had anything like that before. It's like, wow, a whole year to actually do. And it's not, people have so many misconceptions about what a sabbatical is as a faculty member. They think you travel all the time. It's like, no, not all sabbaticals are traveling. They think you're on vacation. It's like, no, you have to propose a project that you're going to complete during that time. You do have some flexibility in your schedule because you're not teaching during that year and you're not having to do other requirements. But I was very fortunate to receive a sabbatical, and the project that I did then launched a new research agenda for me that, as was mentioned, investigates information-seeking and sense-making experiences of parents of kids with disabilities. So I was very thankful for that opportunity to NKU, but then also the Down Syndrome Association of Greater Cincinnati, which provided me with quite a bit of support in terms of actually being able to do the study, and a couple focus groups were hosted at their offices. All right, so let's get into the study. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, parents of children with disabilities are continually confronted with vast amounts of information to make sense of as they raise a child. This is in addition to the usual information most parents learn raising a typical child, which they figure out some of that themselves. They rely on sources such as parents, friends, and pediatricians to navigate their parenting journey. But for parents of children with disabilities, we have additional tasks of managing a diagnosis, or often multiple diagnoses, navigating complicated medical and educational systems with numerous specialists, therapists, educators, insurance brokers, and Medicaid, if we're lucky enough to get our child on a waiver program that provides additional services and a medical card. And you learn a lot about waiting and being on hold, and often that there's things people just don't tell you, and you happen to hear about it maybe as a side conversation from somebody else, and they're like, oh, I need to follow up on that. But they don't just present this in a nice, neat, orderly manner. Here's the guide, and here's what you're supposed to do. And so as a result of that, sometimes people miss out on things they need to know, they should know about. Particularly, I think of the Medicaid waiver program, of how many parents have no idea that exists at all. And that on the Michelle P. waiver, as an example, there's 6,000 people on the waiting list who really need it and have nothing, basically. And so those are people who actually have heard of it and they've applied, but there's still others that have no idea that this is even something that can provide some support to them. And the thing is, as a parent, there's huge decisions that you're making all the time, and some of them are very scary, especially if it's medically oriented. For Tracy and me, we've had to make lots of decisions related to Isaac's heart surgeries. And I can kind of tell you a little bit about that process. Isaac was born with a condition called AV canal, which is about half of kids with Down syndrome have a heart condition, and that one's pretty common. When he was 6 months old, they repaired that. He did well. He wasn't symptomatic. And then when he was about 3, he developed a condition called subaortic stenosis, which happens about 10% of the time. But no one tells you that. They think, oh, you're all done. You have heart surgery. And that is the case for most kids. They have the one surgery and they're done. They don't have to go back and do that again. And so what happens is because his heart's been altered and they've had to move things around, that changed the blood flow and it causes friction below his aortic valve and basically causes this fibrous tissue to build. So when he was 3, they saw that was going on. He also was having some pretty significant leakage from his valves, and so he had an 8-hour surgery in which they removed the tissue and they tightened up the valves. That was pretty intense. And then we thought we were done again until 7 years later. He'd go in for his echoes, and then, the subaortic stenosis is coming back, which happens about 20% of the time of people who develop that condition. But again, no one told us that. So his 3rd surgery was a complete shock. Like we weren't, he was 10 years old. We thought we wouldn't have to do that again. Now I've done lots of research since, and so it's like I see that it is something that can recur. But no one actively told us that information. I really had to kind of seek that out. And then the tissue, he's about 5 years out from that surgery, and it's coming back, and he's actually at a level that is surgery level, but they can go a little bit higher, and they're trying to stretch that out as long as they can. So when he went in December for his last echo, it had gotten a little bit worse, but not quite at the level we were looking at to do surgery. So we go back in June again, but at some point it will happen. And of course I'm prepared for that now, but I wasn't for the other surgeries, and that was kind of a crazy way of learning that sort of information. But that's been a huge thing of having to learn about that, making decisions about do we do it or not. I mean, he's got a wonderful cardiologist who really looks at this as a team approach that we have input on it. Obviously they make a recommendation, and I have found that to be the case with several of the things that we've dealt with him. Isaac also had severe sleep apnea that required a surgery. He had low muscle tone, hypermobile joints, behavior issues, which again, not one of those things they tell you a lot about when they're a baby, especially as they get older and they get the teen years, and how that can be a little bit different. Fortunately, he has pretty normal hearing and vision, which is unusual with kids with Down syndrome, but he does get tested for that all the time. Parents also make decisions about academic, vocational, and social goals for individual education plans, behavioral and developmental concerns that require therapies that may or may not work. So you go through a lot of things. Sometimes there's medications involved too that you're trying to figure out. And then also social concerns for our children about whether they're going to be accepted, not with typical friends as well as kids that have disabilities, and then just long range as adults, what's going to happen with our children. And one of the things that I found in my initial looking at the research, there's a lot of focus on how that initial diagnosis is communicated and a lot about what happens at birth. Not so much about that this is an ongoing life cycle experience, and you're going to be going through sometimes repeated traumas, certainly new information that you're not going to be expecting throughout the entire life of your child. And there hasn't been as much study of that and how that information is communicated all along the way about schooling, medical issues, and again, transition to adulthood. So I knew there was something that needed to be addressed there as well. So a lot of this information can be overwhelming and often very difficult to understand, even for someone with a PhD. We do not know everything at all. So in fact, we probably know less. We know enough to know to ask more questions. That's really what a PhD gives you. It's emotionally difficult at times with worries about medical issues and reviewing test scores sometimes that don't necessarily celebrate how well our children are doing, although we certainly do learn to celebrate every accomplishment they have. As I began my project, I reviewed the sense-making literature that I had studied closely during my research of new employee socialization and determined this was the lens through which I would conduct my study. Sense-making itself has typically been studied from an organizational perspective. And Carl Weick, who is one of the authors of this particular study, he's an organizational management scholar who said that sense-making explains how we cognitively organize and give meaning to new information, and by selecting what we think is the most likely meaning for many possibilities. And we remember that for the future so that we encounter similar situations, we'll come back to that meaning. So when I teach this concept in my organizational communication class, I'll give a scenario where you work in an office setup and everybody works in cubicles. And you come in on a Monday morning and the person who's in the cubicle next to you, they're not there and all their stuff is gone. Okay, so that's new information. So then I ask them, so what do you think happened? What do you think happened? What would you say if you saw that in your workplace? They got let go. Okay, anything else? Quit? Any other explanations?
They moved, I mean.
They moved, maybe, okay. We've had people said they died. So that's like 4 different ones, 4 different possible meanings. Which one do you think you would go with, the most likely? They got fired, yeah. And where did that come from? Have you seen that before? Personal experience, you might have watched the media, so there's something in your past that you will then select at. That's what that means. And we do this all the time when we get new information. It's kind of a way to simplify things for us where we come up with, okay, that has meaning, that makes sense. Sometimes we're wrong, and we'll start talking and spreading rumors, and that changes things about how people make sense of the situation. But that's really what Weick was looking at, was how do we go about doing that? And he proposed 2 sort of avenues that happen with this. One is that we use what he calls established communication scripts. So, because we can't live every day with everything being completely brand new to us, we come up with kind of a script that we can follow all the time. So think about how much of our life is kind of automatic. So again, in my class situation, I'll say, okay, you go to McDonald's, what do you do? What's the script for going to McDonald's? What's the first thing you do when you go in there? You walk up to the register. What are you expected to do? Order some food. You're looking up at the menu up there. You move off to you pay. You move off to the side. You wait for it. They tell you your food's ready. You sit down and eat. And that's a script that we follow all the time when we go to a fast food restaurant. And so that would be what he would call a communication script. The other situation when we're encountering really brand new information is something that he called a communication cycle of information seeking through questions, surveillance, and observation to determine a course of action or what something means. And so, again, going back to that restaurant example, most of us don't tend to eat at high-end restaurants all the time. Do you ever feel a little stressed when you go into some, like Jeff Ruby's or something? Like, maybe some of you eat there all the time, but, I don't usually. But it's kind of nerve-wracking, when it's really fancy and you're not sure, like, not even sure I know what all this food is, how do I order, what's the right way to do it, how do I sit, that type of thing. So we end up observing, or maybe we ask some questions before we go, we might prepare for it. And so that's kind of how we deal with it. It's really completely brand new information, but we use these strategies of asking questions, doing surveillance, and doing some observation. Okay, so the study itself. So I facilitated a series of focus groups with parents of children with disabilities. And I recruited the participants through personal contacts, regional support groups, and contacts at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. And I ended up interviewing 21 parents who had 25 children with disabilities. There were a few parents that had multiple children that had disabilities. Many of the children had Down syndrome, and part of that because there was some assistance from the Down Syndrome Association. But there were others that had autism, ADHD, as well as a variety of physical, medical